Seems fair to me. Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it. Sounds like any reason you can't.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Happy holidays, and thanks for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. Lots to talk about, but first, let's meet the panelists. We start with Wendy Wiese from the Big 550 KTRS, co-host of the Jennifer and Wendy Show. Joe Holleman, who sometimes appears on that program when he's not writing his column for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and STLtoday.com. Ray Hartmann from the Big 550 KTRS, Riverfront Times, and RawStory.com. And from the St. Louis American, dressed for the season, there he is, editor, columnist, Alvin Reid, who was among our crowd this past Friday when we raised close to $500 in 2 hours for the Salvation Army at the Ladue Schnucks Alvin. And we had some notables drop by, including Schnuck CEO Todd Schnuck, former Fire Chief Sherman George, former governor of this great state of Missouri, Jay Nixon, and Mark Smith, Clayton, Missouri Police Chief. It was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of cold. It
was cold.
No, it was a great night. And hey, they're still out there. Please throw something in that little bucket because it means a lot to a lot of people.
Be generous, but
We had a great time.
We had such a good time, and then Charlie and his wife Beth hosted us, and it was just a lovely little Christmas party. But those bell ringers worked very hard.
And there was so much joviality, I left my hat at Charlie's.
Yeah, well, it was a jovial. Okay, Alvin, I want to ask you about Drag Queen Christmas. I haven't been to this show yet, but it took place last night at the Factory in Chesterfield, and it was the source of a lot of controversy this week when a state senator out of St. Charles sent a letter to the pageant promoter, not the pageant, the factory promoters, as well as the mayor of Chesterfield, saying that this performance should not be shown to people who are under 18. And so apparently the factory in the city of Chesterfield agreed that there had to be some sort of admission restriction to those who were not minors, 18 and over. But I was thinking to myself, of all the issues out there affecting the youth, to make an issue of, you know, men dressed as women singing Diana Ross songs, I mean, is that really a pressing issue?
Well, it's not. I can just say this. Now, first of all, this is not a judgment on anybody's sexuality or how lifestyle or anything, zero. I think that if you have to be 18 to go see an R-rated movie, I mean 17 to go see an R-rated movie, I'm not saying you have to be 18 to see this type of performance, but for some reason, there is a, you know, just the movie makers themselves create this age kind of like limit, and they say that you have to be 17 to see an R-rated movie. Now, whether it's because of the language or sex or violence, whatever, they don't even really say. They just say like, well, we think maybe you need to be 17. I think that's a fair assessment. And if the pageant and if the city factory where you're at say like, yeah, I think that's fair to ask that, then I am not in disagreement with that. But I am not saying I am in disagreement with anybody's lifestyle or anything like that.
A drag queen show is not, it's really at most PG. It is not a sex show. And the fact that let's face it, the only obscenity here is Wingnut Senator Bill Eigel using this excuse to try to launch his Wingnut campaign for a Republican nomination for governor. He's got, I don't even know if it's in his district. It's just nonsense. And it's just, homophobia sells to a wing of the Republican Party. That's all this is. There's no issue here. People, of course, if somebody under that age wants to go, it's entertainment. What did you say? I forget what they're singing. This isn't a sex show. It's just a drag queen show, and there's nothing about it that is adult-oriented. The only controversy is it's same-sex. That's it.
But adult-oriented, men dressing like women and singing, and I mean, The Birdcage is one of my favorite movies of all time. Well, absolutely all time. If they want to go with their parents, fine. Let them go with their parents. But racetracks have age limits. The adult realm has age limits. If there is an elementary drag show, okay, fine. Yeah. But this is, to me, in my mind, this isn't the adult realm.
But
and there should be some kind of restriction.
I bet you no kids were going to it anyway.
That's a good point.
I think Ray is right. I didn't even mention the senator's name because what I think he's trying to do, like Jay Ashcroft banning books or Eric Schmidt suing Mexico, is just trying to get his name in the paper, and he's playing us like a Stradivarius.
But no, I agree, and motive coming from wherever it's coming from. But at the same time, I think all of us have raised kids, and there's some things in your mind that say, like, listen, nothing wrong with it.
Nothing.
But I think you need to be of a certain age to see it.
But now, isn't that up to the parents and not some state senator out of St. Charles?
Well, then let the parents take them. Let the parents take them.
Maybe Uncle Bobby is performing in the show. Why can't the 13-year-old go see it?
Well, all right. The National Rifle Association would probably not care if 11-years went to go see Pulp Fiction. Okay.
You're so right. You're so right.
And we would say, like, no, look, NRA, you know, I don't even hate guns, but come on now.
And of all the issues out there, last week, Kelvin Adams, the retiring superintendent of schools for the city of St. Louis, wrote a really wonderful piece in the Post-Dispatch where he said that, you know, he had a great time as superintendent, but unfortunately 192 kids died from crime or violence while he was a superintendent. Now that's an issue that some senator out of St. Charles should get concerned about.
Look, I agree with you, but at the same time, but when they say my remedy is to take over the city police department, then we don't want to hear any part of that. So, I mean, if this is just one little thing that I think it's not. Joe, I'm sorry.
No, I just, first of all, I had no idea that 7 to 12-year-olds wanted to go see drag queen Christmas, where I would have thought they would have picked Polar Express for a 9th time. I mean, but, you know, I think communities can set standards. And if you don't like those standards, then you work within your community, write ordinances or laws that reflect that. So Joe, I guess I'm just not heartily opposed to putting a limit on this.
I agree. I don't disagree with the community's right to set it. This wasn't the community. This was a grandstanding politician, not part of the community, who, I mean, and I understand reason people disagree, but I mean, who are you keeping out again? Like you say, so let's say we set it at 18 because we don't have 17-year-olds seeing this. I mean, and again, the underlying assumption that I find, as I said, obscene, is that because it's a drag show, because it's same sex, that's the part that bothers him.
All right,
and I have a problem with
it. But if you say that you can't do this, or we're going to pick and choose which ones you can set an age limit from, that means there should be no age limit for anything.
No, that's not true.
But you know
can
what?
Pick and choose.
There's a pattern here, and it started last year. Maybe it didn't start there when they took that Kansas City gay civil rights exhibit out of the Capitol.
Right.
Now they're banning books in libraries and in schools. And let's face it, the left also tries to quelch speech too, with Jessica Clark's the Rockwood teacher. Not rock teacher. She was a Rockwood's
board member.
Right. She got admonished for her language, however abhorrent it was.
The only problem I have with the drag shows is when the performers are more attractive than the women in the audience.
Wendy, Wiese, we're on a nightclub theme, and the former owner of Rain Nightclub, which had all sorts of violations during COVID because the patrons weren't wearing masks and they weren't enforcing social distancing, and then they were in violation of quite a few city codes, and they finally were closed down, and she, Dana Kelly, was more than $400,000 in arrears to her debtors. Well, is it a little bit strange that the top enforcer of laws in the city, which would be the county, or rather the circuit attorney, has hired her, a woman who's been trying to evade laws? Dana Kelly has a job in the circuit attorney office of Kim Gardner.
For $50,000 a year, according to Christine Byers. That's the salary. Mr. Guilfoyle said that what was the point that he was making? They were being very, very hush-hush about it in terms of the details and requiring sunshine law paperwork and that kind of thing, applications. I think that perception is reality when it comes to our city right now. And I think that every part of the machine has to be working in as finely attuned a manner as possible. This just raises eyebrows. It doesn't pass the smell test. It looks really bad when somebody who has had this kind of a reputation with her nightclub, and I'm sure she's a great businesswoman, things just maybe didn't fall her way, but $50,000 she ends up in the circuit attorney's office, which is already under a microscope. It just doesn't look good.
I think everybody has to judge through their own lens and municipality, so to say. And listen, I won't peg this just on Kim Gardner or the city. I would say hey,
anywhere.
Guess who got hired at the city of Kirkwood, Alvin? And I was, so they did this here in Kirkwood, and now they work for the city or the mayor's office or whatever. I'd have a problem with that. So thus, I have a little problem with this.
I think part of it just becomes the low bar of government at some point in time. Worked for city government, then went to work in a nightclub. It was apparently mismanaged or owned it, and now in the circuit attorney's office. I mean, God bless having political connections, but that's what we get. I mean, so it shouldn't come as a shocked and appalled by it that somebody who knew somebody got a job. Is it a little bit, as you said, cringeworthy that you get it in the circuit attorney's office? Absolutely, but we're talking about the biggest problems facing children aren't drag shows. I don't think the biggest problem facing the circuit attorney's office is they hired Dana Kelly.
Well, and I don't think I don't have a problem with it at all because, I mean, first of all, we talk about $50,000 like it's a huge sum of money, and not really that. In today's, it's more than minimum wage, but it's not, it's hardly an excessive amount of money. I don't have any idea if she's, how would we know if she's qualified? I will say this. She was, from all appearances, she had a very successful, as an entrepreneur, she was successful before she wasn't. I know what that feels like. And I mean, she had the biggest nightclub downtown. And the problem with Reid wasn't, she didn't build the biggest nightclub downtown because there was mismanagement. Obviously, there were horrific crime problems around it afterwards. The neighbors spoke up as they had a right to do. It got closed down. It's not clear that the crime problems were her fault, and there's no evidence that she had any wrongdoing. So to me, for her to get an administrative job, I mean, she didn't, I don't see, I know none of you are suggesting she should have some kind of vocational death penalty.
No.
I understand it's about the optics, but I personally think she's got nothing to apologize for, and I don't know what she's doing for Kim Gardner, but I'm not going to judge her, that's all.
Speaking of salaries, the new chief of police is going to receive, his name is Robert Tracy, by the way, from Wilmington, Delaware. We mentioned this last week, Ray. He's going to make $275,000 a year. $100,000 will be a private donation from the St. Louis Police Foundation. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch editorial page says, oh, that's a slippery slope because now it's possible that the chief will give people who fund that foundation preferential treatment or favors or who knows what.
Well, my original thought was, well, it's okay because they're going to get that anyway. And then a friend of mine who was a police officer said, well, it looks like they bought themselves a chief. And I'm like, oh, well, that's one other way to look at it. I mean, on one hand, yeah, the police foundation has had enormous, first of all, they do a lot of good, but they also have enormous, as we saw with the hiring of Mary Barton in the St. Louis County, they have a lot of influence, directly or indirectly. And I think it is, you talk about optics, we were just talking about it. I think if you really don't operate with the assumption that certain powerful interests should have special access and special favor at the police department, I think it's poor optics. Now, nobody doing it, it's all above board. I'm not suggesting any wrongdoing, but I think that the city arguably should have budgeted more money for this position, but I think it's bad optics.
I think the bad optics is actually on the city, not the foundation, and certainly not on the incoming chief. If that's the kind of money it takes these days to be competitive, to get a quality police chief, and you want to be in the market, and no one's going to argue that crime is not a major concern in St. Louis, so it's not like, oh, anybody will do this, is pretty much a no-brainer job. No, it's not. It's a highly complex, complicated, stressful, dangerous job to have. And if the $175,000 okayed by ordinance isn't enough to compete, then the city needs to raise that. Then you don't have the foundation having to kick in money. Then we don't have this problem of, well, will they be answering to these powerful people? First of all, mine is always, people high up always answer to powerful people.
That's right.
Whether they gave
Whether they're giving
$100,000
money or not.
You know, it was always my argument when they would say, well, you know, this candidate won't cater to, and it's like, no, when the chairman of the bank or IBM calls, that president takes the call. It doesn't matter what. And it's the same way here. So I think what the city needs to do is make sure that their salary scale for these jobs is competitive so that you can get good people who can hopefully turn things around.
Okay, well, why is it then when the state football team wants to turn it around, and they say, like, look, the budget says we can hire a coach for, instead of $175,000, let's say $1.75 million. And the boosters say, like, hey, to get the guy or woman that we want, it's going to take some more money. We'll throw that money in. Now, you could say that, now, coach, you're now beholden to the people that gave you this extra money, and really what it comes down to, the players, the fans, all the other coaches, everybody in the state says, like, look, as long as we win games, I don't care who pays it. So as long as crime goes down, I'm more...
We'll be his boosters.
I'm going to be giving to the foundation.
Yeah, pass the hat. Right, exactly.
All right, Wendy, I want to ask you then about, no, I'm going to ask you, Joe, about this new 12-mile biking and hiking trail. I think it's called the Brick Line.
Yep.
And this week, Greater St. Louis, Inc., which has kind of replaced the Chamber of Commerce as well as some other organizations, kind of like the big civic booster, released a study that was conducted by Ernst & Young indicating that this Brick Line, a bike and walking path connecting Tower Grove Park and parks in North St. Louis and the Arch and Forest Park, is going to generate about $460 million in economic activity. Among things, property values will rise because of this hiking and biking trail. Are you buying it?
I can do better. It'll raise $722 million, and I just figured that out on the drive in. I love these projections. It sort of reminds me of the old Fair St. Louis. We think 7 million people attended the fireworks last night.
Exactly.
And it was like, well, I didn't count, so I guess I'll take their word for it. First of all, I think it's a great idea. I am a cyclist, so
Yes,
any place that I can ride my bike, more places, that's great, especially the one that connects the Arch to Forest Park. I think will be heavily used. I think the one that connects Tower Grove to Fairgrounds, over time, people will discover that because cyclists are always looking for a new route to ride. The fact that it's going to generate $460 million of revenue, I'm thinking what they do is they sit around and figure 800 million, and they go, no, that sounds too high. 200 million, no, that sounds too low. And they all agree $469 million or whatever.
Well,
I have no faith that it's going to generate that. Do I think it's a good idea? Yes. And to me, if what it does is keeps the area from receding, going back, if it bolsters it so that it stabilizes it or causes slight improvements, I think it'll be well worth it.
Well, let's focus on the fact that that we have already established ourselves as curmudgeonly and sort of cynical at this stage of our lives. But I truly do believe that in kind, you know, maybe in a way that cannot be measured, it is going to have a transformative effect on this city. I really do believe that, because we see young people, we see older people, no offense, but we do see young people who are attracted to cities with just this kind of thing. And maybe that's beyond our pay grade or our, demographic grade at this point. But I do think it will transform the perception of our city.
I want to say something. First of all, I think,
which could,
and I don't think we should
property
denigrate
values.
old cyclists. Like
No,
that.
I'm not.
But, I mean,
Not at all. I give it to him for cycling.
I'm older.
Season.
I've told him I have ties older than him, even though they're clip-ons. But no, and I think I do not. I hate the overuse, no offense, of the word transformative. It's constantly
We
used.
need
I know,
transformative.
we'd like to, it's aspirational more than transformative. I think it's a great idea. I do. I don't think there's any reason to believe it's going to, I mean, I think it's a fine idea. It really is. I don't know how you can criticize it. But it's as
find a
bad.
way.
Huh? Well, it's a bad, no, I think it's a really good idea. It's just that it's a worse idea to keep exaggerating and overestimating and over-promising stuff. And as you know, Greater St. Louis
But doesn't that make
is
you
a
skeptical?
private company that
Right.
doesn't have any
But
credibility.
doesn't that make you skeptical of the idea if you feel as though you have to kind of like camouflage the
I don't know
value
the
of
idea.
what it does?
When you look
I
at the
just wish
study,
they'd stop lying about
when you
stuff.
look at the study, Ernst & Young on every page says that, look, we relied on the data and assumptions provided to us by the client. They may or may not be true, and there are things in the future that could change all of this, and they say on every page, look at our assumptions on page 3, this thing may not happen. But here's my problem with it overall. It's a $200 million bike trail. We already have bike trails. Do you know there's one that goes from the Arch up to the Chain of Rocks Bridge? What kind of economic development did that bring?
Well, it
and we
doesn't bring
keep
economic
saying in
development.
this town,
It's
we
a
can,
network.
let's build something big, like the NGA, the convention center, the stadium, the ballpark village, or Metrolink, and we keep waiting for the economic renaissance for our area. Instead, people are moving out. Posinelli is moving out to Clayton
And
this
you know
week.
what? Greater St. Louis did a press release, which was really some gymnastics, in which it said, this is great for Clayton. All their stuff about downtown, the Central Corridor, said, we're still committed. Oh, by the way, this is great for Clayton.
Well, it might be great.
No,
The
I'm
funny
just
thing is,
saying,
you know that
and you
Posinelli,
lose
by the way,
credibility.
Posinelli got a TIF to build in St. Louis City in 2010. Now it's moving out.
Right.
I think that everyone's got it
You're right.
wrong. If you want to attract young people, little shops, bakeries, coffee stores, they don't want big things. They don't need huge construction projects. They want a sidewalk with people on it. They're going in and out of stores, like Kirkwood, like South Grand.
Bikes, don't underestimate the importance of cyclists when you talk about youth, younger people being attracted to an urban area. I mean, you know, is any kind of city. I think that's why I think it's a good idea. But you know, it's not just anybody putting out a report for Ernst & Young without really their permission. It's our civic progress. It's our community. And you've got to, I've said this for 40 years, everybody's got a team. It's like everybody's got a baseball team. You got to be better than this. You cannot have your top leadership doing this kind of nonsense.
All right, I got you. Real quick, from my time at RCGA, there truly is a formula that will turn 75 cents into money spent in the city into $75 worth of economic development. I'm literally.
Oh, yeah. Well.
Reid McClellan knows how to do these calculations.
Champagne should be
Reid
coming.
McClellan can calculate these
Well,
numbers.
speaking of money, Joe, this week there was a story in your paper, I think it was Jacob Barker, who looked at Reverend Darnell West with Infinity Church, or is it Inspiration Church? And his job was to take USDA money and provide lunches to the kids. And as it turns out, he's using money to go in a helicopter and fly to his different services. And they're finding that, you know, there really wasn't any accountability for these pack and go programs where they'd put money on or they put food on a table, kids could come and take it, go home with it, and maybe they did eat it, maybe they didn't. All we know is that your paper about a month or so ago did another story on another church where the founder was also handing out food. Now she's got a $975,000 home in St. Charles. Are we learning something that maybe we're just throwing out too much money in recent years?
Well, in recent years, I would say we've been throwing out money for decades without any strings attached. But in fairness, Reverend West has said, that, no laws were broken. And I believe him. And I believe that federal investigators should go through his records with a fine-tooth comb, and then when they find no wrongdoing, then Reverend West can hold that report up. So if that's the case, I mean, who didn't think that when COVID came around and the government just said, let's open up the spigot and we're going to let this money run out here, that a certain percentage, not saying that it was the Reverend West or anyone else, but that a certain amount of government money always ends up going to fraud and abuse. It always does. And what we end up doing is we look at this case or this case or that case, where the problem is this just idea of huge government throwing huge amount of monies, and then they
no
go,
accountability.
well, problem solved.
Minute to go.
I'll disagree with Joe. I'll say this. I'm not going to say anything about Reverend West, East, anybody. I mean, I am not going to get, I don't know what they did or didn't do. In general, the country was, and originally it was actually during the Trump administration, but and then certainly under Joe Biden, the economy was saved during COVID by the government, what you call throwing out money. Now, I could not agree with you more that the amount of fraud, whether it's these guys or not, we don't know, but the amount of fraud has been just really astonishing, and it's bad.
Right.
But that doesn't mean
don't put it on the government.
Right.
Put it on, Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz out there? The evil people do evil things, and a time may come when we have to do this all over again. Hopefully it's not for another 100 years, but yeah, we will have to go back to the big trough, and some people will steal out of it.
And it's a sad commentary on our world that as big a percentage of it seems to have been done. And again, we don't know the specifics.
In the name of right.
But it doesn't make
Fortunately, that'll be the last word on that topic as we go to the old mailbag. Concerning the idea of a nationwide campaign to promote and sell St. Louis, of course we should. And someone needs to remind and sell the business leaders of St. Louis on the importance of community pride. That from James Paradise of De Pere. We also heard from Bruce Korbsmeyer of Oakville. Loan forgiveness solution? Restrict eligibility to those who went to community colleges and public universities. People were not forced to take out loans to go to private colleges. Thank you, Mr. Korbsmeyer. You can write us, care of 9 PBS, 3655 Olive Street, St. Louis, Missouri, 63108. Don't forget those emails, Donnybrook at 9pbs.org, and use hashtag DonnybrookSTL when you tweet. Call the 9 line, 314-512-9094, and don't forget to listen to us on your favorite podcast source, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and Google Play. Thanks so much to Joe Holleman for sitting in for Bill McClellan, who will be back next week at this time. Folks, have a happy Hanukkah, a Merry Christmas. Thanks for inviting us into your home, and we'll see you next week.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.